"You need to move along now or face arrest." The words cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Valerie Blackwood looked up from her voter registration clipboard, meeting the hostile stare of Officer Derek Kane. Behind him, 3 more patrol cars pulled into the community center parking lot, their red and blue lights painting the peaceful scene in harsh, violent colors. "I'm sorry, officer," Valerie said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Could you specify which ordinance we're violating?" Kane's hand moved to his radio. "Unit 47 to dispatch," he barked, his eyes never leaving Valerie's face. "We have suspicious activity at the voter drive location on Martin Luther King Boulevard. Multiple subjects refusing lawful orders to disperse." The dozen volunteers manning the registration tables exchanged nervous glances. Elderly Mrs. Patterson clutched her pen tighter. College student Marcus stepped closer to his table, protective instincts kicking in. The line of citizens waiting to register, working mothers, retirees, young fathers, began murmuring among themselves. "Sir," Valerie continued, maintaining her calm demeanor, "we have proper permits for this voter registration drive. All documentation is current and filed with the appropriate—" "I don't care about your paperwork," Kane interrupted, stepping closer. "This is a public nuisance. You're blocking pedestrian traffic." Valerie glanced at the empty sidewalk stretching 50 yards in both directions, not a single pedestrian in sight. The setup was 15 feet from the walkway, precisely positioned to comply with all regulations she'd researched thoroughly. Sergeant Marcus Webb emerged from the second patrol car, his movements deliberate and calculated. Behind him came Detective Rita Cruz, her notebook already out, pen poised. The circle was tightening. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see some identification," Webb announced, his voice carrying the weight of practiced authority. Cell phones appeared in the crowd. Cameras started recording. The peaceful Saturday afternoon had transformed into something else entirely. The handcuffs clicked twice, then silence fell over the crowd of voters. 3 hours earlier, Valerie's alarm had chimed at exactly 5:30 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 20 years. She moved through her routine with practiced precision, coffee brewing while she reviewed the day's schedule, documents arranged in chronological order on her kitchen counter, each item checked off her handwritten list. The manila folder labeled Community Voter Drive, Saturday, October 14th, sat prominently among her papers. Inside, permits were arranged by date filed, contact information for volunteers typed in neat columns, and a detailed timeline marked with 15-minute intervals. Old habits, she told herself. Preparation prevented problems. By 8 a.m., she was dressed in comfortable jeans and a crisp white blouse, approachable but professional, the kind of outfit that invited conversation without intimidating first-time voters. She'd learned over the years that appearances mattered, especially in communities where trust in institutions ran thin. The drive to the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center took 12 minutes through neighborhoods she'd known since childhood. Corner stores with hand-painted signs advertising phone cards and money transfers. Elderly men gathering outside barbershops for their morning debates. Children playing on stoops while their mothers swept front steps with methodical strokes. This was home. This was why the work mattered. Valerie parked her modest Honda Civic beside the community center, noting how the building's fresh paint couldn't quite hide the bullet holes from last year's drive-by shooting. Progress came slowly here, measured in voter registration cards and city council attendance records, rather than grand gestures. "Morning, Judge. Miss Blackwood," called Pastor Jerome Washington as he unlocked the center's front doors. He caught himself quickly, glancing around to ensure no one had overheard the slip. "Just Valerie today, Pastor," she reminded him gently. "We're all volunteers here." Inside, the fellowship hall buzzed with quiet energy. folding tables arranged in precise rows, voter registration forms stacked in neat piles, pens counted and recounted. Maria Santos, a retired teacher, smoothed tablecloths with the same care she'd once given to classroom bulletin boards. College freshman Marcus Thompson practiced his voter eligibility script, stumbling slightly over the residency requirements. "Remember," Valerie addressed the group as they gathered for final instructions, "we're here to help people exercise their constitutional right to vote. Nothing more, nothing less. If anyone has questions about the process or encounters problems, direct them to me." She distributed copies of the relevant city ordinances, parking regulations, noise restrictions, pedestrian right-of-way rules. Each volunteer received a laminated card with key legal points, highlighted in yellow. Details mattered. Documentation mattered. Following procedure mattered. The first citizens began arriving by 10:00 a.m. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, 83 years old, had never registered to vote in her life. Her granddaughter held her elbow as Valerie guided her through each section of the form, explaining how her voice would count in local school board elections. "I just never thought it made a difference," Mrs. Patterson admitted, her handwriting shaky but determined. "Every voice matters," Valerie assured her. "Especially yours." By noon, they'd registered 47 new voters. The rhythm was steady, purposeful. Check identification, verify address, explain the process, complete the paperwork. Valerie moved between tables, answering questions, resolving confusion, keeping detailed logs of each registration. That's when she noticed the patrol car. It passed slowly, the officer inside craning his neck to observe their operation. Nothing unusual about police presence. Community events often drew routine security checks. But something in the driver's posture, the deliberate pace of his surveillance, triggered an instinct she'd learned to trust. 20 minutes later, the same car circled back. This time, it parked across the street. The officer remained inside, radio pressed to his mouth, clearly making a report. "Everything okay, Valerie?" Pastor Washington asked, following her gaze. "I'm sure it's fine," she replied, though her hand moved unconsciously to the folder containing their permits. Just routine observation. But the feeling in her stomach suggested otherwise. She'd spent enough time reading police reports and reviewing arrest procedures to recognize when surveillance crossed into something more aggressive. The officer's body language spoke of anticipation, not casual monitoring. Marcus Thompson approached with a concerned expression. "That's the third time that car's been by," he said quietly. "My cousin got hassled by those same officers last month. They said he was loitering outside the corner store where he works." Valerie made a mental note of the patrol car's number, Unit 47, and the time, 12:43 p.m. If this escalated, documentation would be crucial. She pulled out her phone and discreetly photographed the vehicle, making sure to capture the license plate and unit designation. "Let's just keep focused on our work," she told Marcus. "We have permits. We're following all regulations. We have every right to be here." But she couldn't shake the memory of other community events that had been disrupted by overzealous enforcement. The back-to-school rally shut down for noise violations, despite being well within legal limits. The neighborhood cleanup project stopped for blocking traffic on a street with virtually no vehicle usage. Patterns? That's what concerned her most. Not isolated incidents, but coordinated efforts to discourage civic engagement in specific communities. By 1:15 p.m., they'd registered 62 voters. The line remained steady. Working parents on lunch breaks, college students between classes, elderly residents who'd made special trips. Each registration represented someone choosing to participate in democracy. Often, for the first time. Then Unit 47's doors opened, and Officer Derek Kane stepped out. His partner, Officer Lisa Chen, emerged from the passenger side, her expression uncertain. Kane adjusted his utility belt and began walking toward their tables with purposeful strides. Valerie straightened her shoulders and checked her watch. 1:18 p.m. She made one final entry in her logbook, documenting the exact time and circumstances of the officer's approach. Whatever happened next, there would be a record. The peaceful afternoon was about to become something else entirely. Kane's approach wasn't casual. Valerie had observed enough law enforcement interactions to recognize the difference between community policing and aggressive enforcement. His hand rested on his radio, his stride carried intent, and his eyes swept the scene like a predator evaluating prey. "Stay calm, everyone," she whispered to her volunteers. "Continue your work. Document everything." Maria Santos discreetly activated her phone's recording function. Marcus Thompson positioned himself near the permits folder. Pastor Washington stepped closer to Mrs. Patterson, who was still completing her registration form with careful, deliberate strokes. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Conversations became hushed. Citizens in line glanced nervously between the approaching officers and the volunteers who'd been helping them. Some stepped back, creating distance from what they sensed was coming. Valerie remained seated at her table, continuing to assist the young mother across from her. Professional composure under pressure, another old habit that served her well. She completed the registration process methodically, checking each box, verifying each signature, maintaining the facade of normalcy even as tension crackled through the air. Officer Chen hung back slightly, her discomfort evident. She'd partnered with Kane for 6 months and had learned to recognize when his enforcement crossed lines. Today felt different, more personal than procedural. Kane reached the first table and stopped, his presence immediately intimidating the elderly gentleman trying to register. The man's pen froze mid-signature as he looked up at the imposing figure looming over him. "Sir, you'll need to step away from this area," Kane announced it loudly enough for everyone to hear. That's when Valerie knew this wasn't routine enforcement. This was deliberate disruption. "Sir, you'll need to step away from this area," Kane announced, his voice carrying across the tables like a warning shot. The elderly gentleman's pen trembled as he looked up from his half-completed voter registration form. "I'm sorry, officer. Did I do something wrong?" "This entire operation is in violation of city ordinances," Kane declared, loud enough for the growing line of citizens to hear. "Public assembly without proper permits, blocking pedestrian traffic, creating a public nuisance." Valerie stood slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Officer Kane," she said, reading his name badge, "we have all required permits for this voter registration drive. I'd be happy to show you our documentation." Kane's eyes narrowed as they fixed on her. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to pack up these tables immediately and disperse this crowd." "Could you specify which ordinance we're allegedly violating?" Valerie asked, her tone remaining respectful but firm. "Our permits were filed with the city clerk's office 3 weeks ago. We received confirmation of approval on October 2nd. She reached for the manila folder containing their documentation, but Kane stepped closer, his hand moving to his radio. "Don't reach for anything, ma'am. Keep your hands where I can see them." The command sent a ripple of tension through the crowd. Cell phones appeared as citizens began recording the interaction. Mrs. Patterson clutched her registration form tighter, while Marcus Thompson positioned himself protectively near the permits table. "Officer, I'm simply trying to provide the documentation you'd need to verify our compliance," Valerie explained calmly. "We have permits for public assembly, temporary structure placement, and voter registration activities, all filed through proper channels. Officer Chen shifted uncomfortably behind her partner. She'd reviewed the permits herself that morning after Kane insisted they respond to suspicious activity reports. Everything appeared to be in order, but Kane had been insistent about checking the operation firsthand. "I don't care what paperwork you think you have," Kane snapped. "This is creating a disturbance. People are complaining about traffic congestion and noise." Valerie glanced at the nearly empty street. 2 cars had passed in the last 10 minutes. The noise level was barely above normal conversation. "Officer, could you direct me to the specific complaints?" As part of our permit process, we were required to provide contact information for addressing any legitimate concerns. Kane's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, you're beginning to interfere with a police investigation. I'm ordering you to cease this activity immediately." "Investigation of what exactly?" Valerie pressed gently. "We're conducting legal voter registration under properly filed permits. Could you explain what crime you believe is being committed?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kane's training had covered crowd control and public assembly regulations, but he struggled to articulate a specific violation. His orders had been clear: shut down the voter drive, but the legal justification remained murky. "Loitering," he finally declared. "City Ordinance 247.3 prohibits loitering in public spaces." Valerie's eyebrows rose slightly. "Officer, we're not loitering. We're conducting a permitted activity with a specific purpose and defined time frame. Our documentation clearly states operation hours from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. today only." Kane pulled out his radio. "Unit 47 to dispatch. I need backup at the Martin Luther King Community Center. Multiple subjects refusing lawful orders to disperse." "Sir," Valerie continued, her voice carrying the practiced patience of someone accustomed to explaining legal procedures, "before you call for backup, perhaps we could resolve this by reviewing our permits together. I believe there may be a misunderstanding about our authorization." "The only misunderstanding," Kane shot back, "is your belief that you can set up camp wherever you want and call it legal." Pastor Washington stepped forward, his hands visible and non-threatening. "Officer, I'm Jerome Washington, pastor of Mount Olive Baptist Church. We coordinated this drive with city officials weeks ago. Perhaps there's been some miscommunication." Kane spun toward the pastor. "Sir, step back. This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," Washington replied calmly. "This is my community. These are my neighbors exercising their constitutional right to register to vote. Constitutional rights don't override city ordinances," Kane declared, though his knowledge of constitutional law was limited to basic academy training. Valerie seized the opening. "Officer, you're absolutely correct that constitutional rights must be balanced with local regulations. That's precisely why we filed permits and followed all required procedures. Our legal team reviewed every applicable ordinance before we began." The mention of a legal team gave Kane pause. Most community organizers couldn't afford legal representation, yet this woman spoke with the confidence of someone who understood the system intimately. "Legal team?" he asked suspiciously. "Yes," Valerie replied simply. "We wanted to ensure full compliance with all applicable laws and regulations." Kane's radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, what's your status?" He keyed the microphone. "Still unseen. Multiple subjects continuing to resist lawful orders." Valerie pulled out her phone and began taking notes. "Officer Kane, for our records, could you state the specific ordinance number you believe we're violating? We'll need that information for our incident report." "Your incident report?" Kane's voice rose slightly. "Yes, sir. When citizens are asked to cease legal activities, we document the interaction for review by appropriate authorities. It's standard procedure for community organizations. The word procedure seemed to catch Kane off guard. This wasn't typical pushback from community activists. Valerie spoke like someone familiar with official processes, someone who understood how the system worked from the inside. Officer Chen stepped closer to her partner. "Kane, maybe we should verify the permits first," she suggested quietly.
"I don't need to verify anything," Kane snapped. "I see an unauthorized gathering creating a public disturbance." Valerie made another note on her phone. "Officer, I'm documenting that you've declined to review our legal authorization before ordering us to cease activities. That's important information for our compliance review." Kane's face reddened. "Ma'am, you're interfering with police business. Continue this attitude and you'll be arrested for obstruction." "I'm asking questions and taking notes," Valerie replied evenly. "Both protected activities under the First Amendment." The legal reference hit Kane like cold water. Street-level enforcement rarely involved constitutional discussions. This woman wasn't just organizing a voter drive. She was systematically documenting every aspect of their interaction with the precision of someone who understood exactly how such documentation might be used later. Behind them, two more patrol cars pulled into the parking lot, their arrival transforming the peaceful afternoon into something that looked increasingly like a siege. Sergeant Marcus Webb emerged from the lead vehicle, his crisp uniform and measured gait projecting the authority of 15 years on the force. Detective Rita Cruz followed, her notebook already open, pen poised to document whatever violations had prompted the backup call. "What's the situation here, Kane?" Sergeant Webb asked as he approached. "Unauthorized assembly refusing to disperse," Kane reported. "Subject claims to have permits, but won't comply with lawful orders." Webb's gaze settled on Valerie. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Webb. I understand there's some confusion about your authorization to be here." "No confusion on our end, Sergeant," Valerie replied respectfully. "We have all required permits properly filed and approved. Officer Kane declined to review our documentation before ordering us to disperse." Webb looked between Kane and the professionally organized tables. This didn't look like typical unauthorized assembly. "Could I see those permits, ma'am?" Webb asked. Valerie reached slowly for her manila folder. "I'm retrieving our permit documentation." She withdrew 3 official documents bearing city clerk stamps. "Assembly permit filed September 20th, approved October 2nd. Webb examined each document carefully. Everything appeared legitimate. Kane stepped forward aggressively. "Step away from that table and put your hands behind your back." Kane stepped forward aggressively. "Step away from that table and put your hands behind your back." The crowd of citizens tensed collectively, phones raised higher as the confrontation reached a critical point. Valerie remained calm, her voice steady despite the escalating situation. "Officer Kane, before you take any enforcement action, I need you to understand that arresting someone conducting legally permitted activities could constitute a civil rights violation under federal law," she said clearly, ensuring her words carried to the recording devices surrounding them. Kane's hand froze on his handcuffs. The legal terminology wasn't typical street-level pushback. Civil rights violations triggered federal oversight, internal affairs investigations, and the kind of scrutiny that ended careers. Sergeant Webb stepped between Kane and Valerie, his voice low but firm. "Kane, hold position. Let's verify these permits before taking any action." "Sergeant, she's been interfering with our investigation from the start," Kane protested, his frustration mounting as his authority was questioned in front of the crowd. Detective Cruz examined the documents Webb handed her, cross-referencing permit numbers on her phone. "These check out," she announced, "all properly filed and approved through city channels."
The admission sent murmurs through the gathering crowd. Citizens who'd stepped back began moving closer again, emboldened by the official confirmation that the voter registration drive was completely legal. "Then we have a problem," Kane declared, his voice rising. "Because I received direct orders to shut this operation down." The slip caught everyone's attention. Sergeant Webb's expression hardened. "Direct orders from whom, Officer Kane?" Kane realized his mistake immediately. He'd revealed that this wasn't routine patrol work responding to citizen complaints. Someone had specifically targeted this voter registration drive for disruption. Dispatch reported suspicious activity," Kane backtracked, but the damage was done. Valerie seized the opening. "Sergeant Webb, could you clarify the chain of command here? Officer Kane just stated he received direct orders to shut down our legally permitted activity. From whom did those orders originate?" Webb found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. Kane's admission suggested coordination beyond normal patrol response. Someone had specifically ordered the disruption of a legal voter registration drive, which raised serious questions about motivation and authority. "Officer Kane, we need to discuss this privately," Webb said firmly. But Kane was beyond listening to reason. The combination of legal pushback, documented permits, and now his sergeant's hesitation had triggered something deeper than professional frustration. This felt personal, like a direct challenge to everything he believed about maintaining order and control. "I don't care who authorized what," Kane announced loudly. "I see a situation that's getting out of hand, and I'm taking control." He moved toward Valerie again, but this time she didn't step back. Years of high-pressure situations had taught her that retreating often emboldened aggressive behavior. Sometimes, the only response to abuse of power was calm, documented resistance. "Officer, I'm going to ask you one final time to specify the crime you believe I've committed," Valerie said, her voice carrying across the parking lot. Kane's face reddened further. "Obstruction of justice. Interfering with a police investigation. Inciting a riot." "What riot?" Detective Cruz interjected, looking around at the peaceful crowd of citizens holding voter registration forms. "I see people exercising their constitutional rights." The support from Cruz seemed to surprise Kane. He'd expected backup officers to fall in line behind his assessment of the situation. Instead, they were questioning his judgment and examining the evidence objectively. Councilwoman Patricia Sterling's black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot at that moment, as if summoned by some invisible signal. She emerged from the vehicle wearing her signature power suit and the expression of someone accustomed to getting her way through social pressure rather than legal authority. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Sterling announced as she approached, her voice carrying the practiced concern of a politician addressing constituents. "I've been receiving calls all morning about this unauthorized gathering disrupting our peaceful neighborhood." Valerie turned to face the new arrival, recognizing Sterling from city council meetings and newspaper coverage. "Councilwoman Sterling, we have all required permits for this voter registration drive. Perhaps there's been some miscommunication about our authorization." Sterling's eyes narrowed as she studied Valerie, taking in her calm demeanor and professional bearing. This wasn't the typical community activist she'd expected to find leading the voter drive. "Permits can be revoked for public safety concerns," Sterling declared, though her knowledge of permit law was limited to what served her political interests. "And I'm seeing clear evidence of public disruption here." "What disruption specifically?" Valerie asked politely. "We're conducting quiet voter registration with citizens waiting patiently in line. Our noise level is well within legal limits, and we're not blocking any traffic or pedestrian access." Sterling gestured broadly at the scene. "The very presence of this gathering is causing community concern. Neighbors are calling about suspicious activities, unfamiliar people congregating in their area." The coded language wasn't lost on anyone present. Unfamiliar people and suspicious activities were dog whistles for racial concerns that Sterling couldn't express directly without exposing herself to discrimination charges. Pastor Washington stepped forward, his patience finally wearing thin. "Councilwoman Sterling, these are my parishioners and community members exercising their right to vote. There's nothing suspicious about citizens participating in democracy." "Pastor Washington, I'm sure you mean well," Sterling replied with condescending sweetness, "but sometimes outside agitators use community events as cover for more radical activities." Valerie's eyebrows rose at the outside agitator reference, another classic deflection used to delegitimize local organizing efforts by suggesting they were somehow foreign or artificial. "Ma'am, I've lived in this community for 12 years, Valerie replied calmly. "I'm not an outside agitator. I'm a neighbor helping neighbors register to vote." Sterling's expression shifted as she studied Valerie more carefully. Something about the woman's composure and articulate responses suggested this wasn't going to be as simple as typical voter suppression tactics. "Well, regardless of your intentions," Sterling continued, "I have authority as an elected official to address public safety concerns in my district." "Actually, Councilwoman," Valerie replied with the same calm precision she'd shown throughout the confrontation, "your authority doesn't extend to overriding properly issued city permits without due process. That would require specific ordinance violations and formal procedures." The legal knowledge caught Sterling off guard. Most community organizers could be intimidated by vague references to official authority. This woman spoke like someone who understood exactly how municipal power worked and what its limitations were. Kane seized the moment to reassert control. "That's it. Everyone needs to disperse immediately, or you'll all be arrested for unlawful assembly." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, while phones continued recording every word of the escalating confrontation. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, while phones continued recording every word of the escalating confrontation. "Officer Kane," Valerie said, her voice cutting through the tension with practiced authority. "Threatening mass arrest of citizens engaged in legal activities could constitute deprivation of rights under color of law. That's a federal felony." The legal citation hit the gathering like a thunderbolt. Even Councilwoman Sterling took a step back, recognizing the serious implications of what Valerie had just stated. Deprivation of rights under color of law wasn't typical community organizer language. It was precise legal terminology that suggested deep familiarity with federal civil rights statutes. Kane's face went pale, then flushed red with rage. "Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but you don't get to lecture me about the law." "I'm not lecturing," Valerie replied evenly. "I'm informing you of the legal consequences of your proposed actions. There's a significant difference." Sergeant Webb moved closer to Kane, his voice low but urgent. "We need to step back and reassess this situation." But Kane was beyond reasoning. The combination of legal pushback, documented permits, questioning from his colleagues, and now precise federal law citations had pushed him past his breaking point. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. Citizens were supposed to comply, not challenge, and certainly not cite federal statutes with courtroom precision. "I've had enough of this," Kane declared, reaching for his handcuffs again. "You're under arrest for obstruction, interference, and whatever else I decide to charge you with." Detective Cruz stepped forward. "Kane, You can't arrest someone for whatever else you decide. That's not how charges work. The pushback from his own colleague sent Kane into a fury. Whose side are you on, Cruz? I'm on the side of doing this job correctly, Cruz replied firmly, and arresting someone conducting legal activities isn't correct. Councilwoman Sterling sensed the situation slipping away from her control. The officers were questioning each other instead of presenting a unified front, and this articulate woman was systematically dismantling every justification for shutting down the voter drive. Officers, perhaps we should focus on the bigger picture here, Sterling interjected, her politician's instincts kicking in. This neighborhood has been experiencing increased tensions lately. Sometimes it's better to prevent problems before they escalate. Valerie turned her attention to Sterling. Councilwoman, are you suggesting that citizens registering to vote constitutes a tension that needs prevention? The question was a verbal trap, and Sterling recognized it too late. Any answer would either admit to voter suppression or contradict her previous statements about neighborhood concerns. I'm saying that sometimes community harmony requires thoughtful timing of certain activities, Sterling replied carefully. Thoughtful timing, Valerie repeated, ensuring the recording phones captured the phrase. Could you clarify what timing would be appropriate for citizens to exercise their constitutional right to vote? Pastor Washington couldn't contain himself any longer. This is exactly what happened in 1965, he declared, his voice rising with moral authority. Different uniforms, same excuses, same efforts to stop our people from voting. The historical reference electrified the crowd. Citizens who'd been nervously watching began stepping closer, their phones held higher. The comparison to civil rights-era voter suppression wasn't lost on anyone present. Kane exploded at the pastor's words. Don't you dare compare us to those people. We're law enforcement officers doing our job. Then do your job correctly, Valerie interjected. Enforce actual laws, not personal preferences or political agendas. Sterling's phone buzzed urgently. She glanced at the screen, and her expression darkened. Someone was updating her about the situation, and apparently it wasn't going according to plan. I'm calling the mayor, Sterling announced, pulling out her phone. This situation requires higher authority to resolve. Valerie nodded approvingly. That's an excellent idea, Councilwoman. Mayor Johnson should definitely be informed that city-issued permits are being challenged without legal justification. The confidence in Valerie's response caught Sterling off guard. Most activists would be intimidated by threats to involve higher authorities. This woman seemed to welcome official oversight, as if she had nothing to hide and everything to gain from formal review. Kane made his move while Sterling was distracted with her phone call. He stepped toward Valerie with handcuffs ready, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she addressed the crowd of recording citizens. I want everyone to witness what's happening here, she announced clearly. A police officer is attempting to arrest someone for conducting legally permitted voter registration. Document everything. Save your recordings. This will be important evidence. The word evidence seemed to freeze Kane mid-step. Evidence implied legal proceedings, investigations, formal review processes. Street-level enforcement usually involved quick resolutions that never reached courtrooms or review boards. Detective Cruz stepped between Kane and Valerie. That's enough, Kane. We're not making any arrests until this gets sorted out properly. Get out of my way, Cruz, Kane snarled. I'm senior officer on scene. You're also the officer who called for backup over legally permitted activities, Cruz replied. Maybe we should wait for the lieutenant to arrive and sort this out. As if summoned by her words, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez's unmarked car pulled into the parking lot. Martinez emerged with the measured pace of someone who dealt with too many volatile situations and learned that calm authority usually worked better than aggressive posturing. She surveyed the scene quickly. Multiple patrol cars, agitated officers, recording citizens, official-looking documents scattered on registration tables, and one woman standing calmly in the center of it all while chaos swirled around her. "Somebody want to explain why I've got 4 units responding to a voter registration drive?" Martinez asked, her voice carrying the weight of 15 years supervising difficult situations. Kane jumped at the chance to present his version. "Lieutenant, subject has been interfering with police operations, refusing lawful orders, and inciting the crowd against law enforcement." Martinez looked at the crowd, a mix of elderly residents, young families, and community volunteers holding voter registration forms. "What crowd incitement? They look pretty calm to me." "They were agitated before you arrived," Kane insisted. Valerie stepped forward. "Lieutenant Martinez, I'm happy to provide you with our complete permit documentation and timeline of events. Everything has been recorded by multiple witnesses." Martinez studied Valerie carefully, noting her calm demeanor, professional language, and systematic approach to documentation. This wasn't typical activist behavior. This was someone who understood exactly how official investigations worked. Martinez studied Valerie carefully, noting her calm demeanor, professional language, and systematic approach to documentation. This wasn't typical activist behavior. This was someone who understood exactly how official investigations worked. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Martinez. Could you walk me through what happened here?" Martinez asked, pulling out her own notebook. Valerie gestured to her documentation folder. "Lieutenant, at approximately 1:18 p.m., Officer Kane approached our legally permitted voter registration drive and ordered us to disperse without reviewing our authorization. When I requested specific ordinance violations, he escalated to threats of arrest." Martinez noted the precise timing and formal language. "You documented exact times?" "Yes, ma'am. Standard procedure when citizens encounter potential procedural violations," Valerie replied, showing her phone notes. "I have timestamps for each interaction, witness information, and recordings of all verbal exchanges." The word procedure again. Martinez had heard enough community complaints over the years to recognize when someone spoke with institutional knowledge rather than typical citizen frustration. Kane stepped forward aggressively. "Lieutenant, she's been hostile from the start, questioning our authority, refusing orders, teaching the crowd to resist law enforcement." "I've been exercising my constitutional rights," Valerie corrected calmly, "asking questions, taking notes, and requesting specific legal justification for orders, all protected activities under the First Amendment." Councilwoman Sterling finished her phone call and approached Martinez with political urgency. "Lieutenant, I've been receiving complaints all morning about this unauthorized gathering. The mayor's office is very concerned about public safety implications." Martinez examined the permits Sergeant Webb handed her. "These look properly authorized to me, Councilwoman. What public safety concerns specifically?" Sterling gestured vaguely at the peaceful crowd. "Large gatherings of unfamiliar individuals can create community tensions. Sometimes prevention is better than responding to problems after they develop." "Unfamiliar individuals?" Martinez repeated, her tone sharpening. "Are you referring to citizens registering to vote in their own community?" The question caught Sterling in another verbal trap. Her coded language was becoming increasingly transparent under direct questioning from someone who understood the legal implications. Captain Alan Foster's police SUV arrived at that moment, pulling up with deliberate slowness. Foster emerged methodically, taking in the scene with calculating eyes. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic. This was the department's political liaison, the officer who handled sensitive situations requiring careful navigation between law enforcement and city politics. "Lieutenant Martinez," Foster called out as he approached. "Status report." "Sir, we have legally permitted voter registration activities that Officer Kane attempted to shut down without clear justification," Martinez reported professionally. Foster's expression remained neutral, but his eyes found Valerie and studied her intently. Something about her composed demeanor under pressure triggered his instincts. Most citizens confronted by multiple officers showed stress, anger, or fear. This woman projected calm authority that suggested extensive experience with high-pressure situations. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Foster. I understand there's been some confusion about your authorization here," he said, his voice carrying practiced political smoothness. "No confusion on our end, Captain," Valerie replied. "We have all required permits properly filed and approved. The confusion seems to be among your officers regarding the legal framework for permitted activities." Foster noted her precise language and direct challenge to his department's competence. This wasn't typical pushback. This was someone speaking with institutional confidence. "Perhaps we could resolve this more efficiently by moving this discussion away from the public eye," Foster suggested. "Sometimes these situations benefit from quieter dialogue." Valerie shook her head politely. "Captain, we're conducting transparent civic activities in public space. There's no reason to move discussions away from public oversight." The refusal to be isolated caught Foster off guard. Most people jumped at the chance to resolve confrontations privately, but this woman seemed to prefer public documentation and witness presence. Kane's patience finally snapped completely. "Captain, I've been trying to control this situation for over an hour. She's been defiant, argumentative, and uncooperative from the start. I've been asking questions and documenting procedural violations," Valerie corrected. "If that constitutes defiance in Officer Kane's opinion, perhaps we should examine what he considers normal citizen compliance." The subtle dig wasn't lost on Foster. This woman was systematically exposing problems with Kane's approach while maintaining legal and verbal high ground. Detective Cruz stepped forward with her notes. "Captain, I've reviewed the permits and observed the interactions. Officer Kane's escalation appears unsupported by actual violations." Foster found himself facing something he hadn't expected: division within his own ranks over the handling of what should have been a simple situation. Kane's aggressive approach was being questioned by his colleagues, suggesting problems with judgment and procedure. "Officer Kane, explain your initial assessment of this situation," Foster ordered. Kane straightened defensively. "Sir, I received information about suspicious activities requiring investigation. Upon arrival, I found unauthorized assembly refusing to comply with lawful orders." "What lawful orders?" Lieutenant Martinez interjected. "They have valid permits for exactly what they're doing." Kane's face reddened further. "The permits don't matter if public safety is at risk." "What public safety risk?" Detective Cruz asked pointedly. "I see peaceful citizens registering to vote." Foster watched the exchange with growing concern. His officers were publicly disagreeing about basic procedures, while an articulate citizen systematically documented every misstep. This was becoming the kind of situation that generated formal complaints, media attention, and internal affairs investigations. Councilwoman Sterling sensed the momentum slipping away. "Captain Foster, sometimes leadership requires making difficult decisions to prevent escalation. The mayor's office supports whatever action you deem necessary to restore order." Valerie's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and smiled slightly, the first genuine emotion she'd shown during the entire confrontation. "Captain," she announced, "I've just received confirmation that Channel 7 News is en route with a camera crew. Apparently, someone alerted them about police interfering with voter registration activities. The news hit the gathered officers like cold water. Media attention transformed routine enforcement into public scrutiny, official review, and potential career consequences. Foster's political instincts kicked in immediately. Perhaps we should de-escalate this situation before it becomes unnecessarily complicated. But Kane was beyond listening to tactical advice. The combination of legal challenges, colleague questioning, media attention, and this woman's unshakable composure had pushed him past his breaking point. "I don't care about cameras," Kane declared. "I'm making an arrest." He lunged toward Valerie with handcuffs ready, but this time she didn't rely on words to stop him. He lunged toward Valerie with handcuffs ready, but this time she didn't rely on words to stop him. Years of training kicked in automatically. Valerie sidestepped Kane's aggressive approach with fluid precision. Her movement so smooth it appeared almost effortless. Kane's momentum carried him past her, causing him to stumble slightly as he tried to regain his footing. "Officer Kane, please step back," Valerie said firmly, maintaining her distance while keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. "Your current actions constitute assault under state law." The crowd gasped collectively as they witnessed the physical escalation. Phones captured every moment: Kane's aggressive lunge, Valerie's defensive movement, and her continued calm professionalism even as the situation turned physical. Kane spun around, his face contorted with rage and embarrassment. Being outmaneuvered in front of his colleagues and the public had triggered something primal in his approach to maintaining authority. "You just assaulted a police officer," Kane snarled, reaching for his weapon. "Everyone saw it." "Actually," Detective Cruz interjected sharply, "everyone saw you attempt to physically grab someone who was standing peacefully." She defended herself with minimal force. Lieutenant Martinez stepped between Kane and Valerie. "Kane, stand down immediately. Holster your weapon." But Kane's rational thinking had completely shut down. The humiliation of being questioned by colleagues, challenged by a citizen, and now physically evaded had created a psychological break where only dominance and control mattered. "She's resisting arrest," Kane declared, though he hadn't actually announced any charges or read any rights. "I'm authorized to use necessary force." Captain Foster recognized the situation spiraling beyond recovery. Kane's behavior had crossed multiple lines: procedural, legal, and tactical. Any use of force at this point would generate investigations that could expose deeper problems within the department. "Officer Kane, I'm ordering you to step back and allow Lieutenant Martinez to handle this situation," Foster commanded with unmistakable authority. Kane looked around wildly, seeing questioning faces among his colleagues instead of the support he'd expected. Detective Cruz had her own phone out, recording Kane's behavior. Sergeant Webb was shaking his head in obvious disapproval. Even Officer Chen, his usual partner, had stepped away from him. "You're all against me," Kane realized aloud. "She's got you all fooled." Valerie remained calm despite Kane's increasingly erratic behavior. "Officer Kane, I want you to know that your actions are being documented by multiple witnesses. Everything you've said and done will be part of any formal review." The reminder about documentation seemed to penetrate Kane's rage-clouded thinking. He looked around at the phones recording from every angle, at his colleagues' disapproving expressions, at Captain Foster's obvious displeasure. "This isn't over," Kane muttered, finally backing away from Valerie but keeping his hand near his weapon. Councilwoman Sterling seized the moment to try salvaging some control. "Captain Foster, regardless of Officer Kane's enthusiasm, We still have the underlying issue of community concerns about this gathering." "What concerns?" Pastor Washington demanded, his patience finally exhausted. "The concern that black people might vote? The concern that our community might participate in democracy." Sterling's face flushed. "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you meant," Washington shot back. "Same tactics, different decade. Try to shut us down with badges and bureaucracy when you can't do it legally." The racial undertones that had been simmering beneath the surface finally exploded into open acknowledgement. Citizens in the crowd began voicing their own experiences with harassment, intimidation, and obstacles to voting. "They made me come back 3 times to register," called out an elderly woman. "Always found some excuse why my papers weren't right." "My son got arrested for loitering outside the early voting location," added another voice. "Same thing happened during the school board elections," Marcus Thompson confirmed. "Officers showing up every time we tried to organize." The personal testimonies created a powerful narrative of systematic voter suppression that the recording phones captured in real time. What had started as one incident was revealing a broader pattern of intimidation and interference. Captain Foster watched his situation deteriorate rapidly. Individual complaints could be dismissed or buried, but multiple witnesses providing similar testimonies created the foundation for federal civil rights investigations. "People, let's all calm down," Foster attempted. "These are serious allegations that deserve proper investigation through appropriate channels." "The appropriate channel is right here, right now," Valerie declared, her voice carrying to every recording device. "Citizens documenting systematic violations of their constitutional rights in real time." Foster studied Valerie with growing unease. Her language, her composure under pressure, her systematic approach to documentation, and her knowledge of legal procedures all suggested someone with extensive experience in formal investigative processes. "Ma'am, you seem very familiar with legal procedures," Foster observed carefully. "What's your background?" Valerie met his gaze steadily. "I work in the justice system, Captain. I understand how evidence collection works, how constitutional violations are documented, and how federal oversight gets triggered." The admission sent a chill through Foster's political calculations. Someone in the justice system could mean anything from a paralegal to a federal prosecutor. But her confidence and precise knowledge suggested someone with significant authority and experience. Kane overheard the exchange and exploded again. "I don't care if she's the Attorney General. She interfered with police operations and resisted arrest." "Officer Kane," Valerie said with devastating calm, "I haven't been arrested. You've made threats, attempted physical contact, and displayed your weapon, but you haven't followed any legal procedures for arrest." The technical accuracy of her statement was undeniable. Kane had been operating on emotion and intimidation rather than following actual arrest protocols. Lieutenant Martinez pulled out her radio. "Dispatch, I need Internal Affairs contacted immediately. We have a situation requiring immediate supervisor response." Kane's face went white. Internal Affairs meant formal investigation, written reports, and potential disciplinary action. His career could be over depending on how this situation was ultimately documented and reviewed. The Channel 7 news van pulled into the parking lot at that exact moment, its satellite dish extending as the crew prepared for live coverage. The arrival of media transformed the confrontation from a local incident into a public event with broader implications. "Captain Foster," the lead reporter called out as she approached with her cameraman, "we're getting reports of police interference with voter registration activities. Could you comment?" "Captain Foster," the lead reporter called out as she approached with her cameraman, We're getting reports of police interference with voter registration activities. Could you comment? Foster's political instincts kicked into overdrive. Media attention meant public scrutiny, official review, and potential career consequences. He needed to control the narrative before it spun beyond recovery. We're simply responding to citizen complaints about public safety concerns, Foster replied carefully, positioning himself between the camera and the chaotic scene behind him. All interactions are being conducted according to department protocols. Reporter Jessica Chen, no relation to Officer Chen, wasn't buying the sanitized explanation. Her investigative background had taught her to look beyond official statements to the evidence on the ground. Captain, I'm seeing legally permitted voter registration activities and multiple officers responding as if to a major incident. What specific public safety concerns prompted this level of response? Foster glanced at Kane, who was still agitated and unpredictable, then at the crowd of citizens holding voter registration forms and phones recording everything. We're still assessing the situation. Jessica Chen turned her attention to Valerie, recognizing her as the calm center of the storm. Ma'am, could you explain what happened here from your perspective? Valerie stepped forward with her documentation folder. We're conducting legally permitted voter registration with proper city authorization. Officer Kane approached and demanded we disperse without reviewing our permits or citing specific violations. She held up the official documents for the camera. Assembly permit approved October 2nd. Temporary structure permit for tables and chairs. Special event permit for voter registration activities, all properly filed through city channels. Jessica Chen examined the permits quickly, her reporter's eye catching the official seals and approval stamps. These appear to be legitimate city permits. Officer Kane, why did you order them to disperse? Kane stepped toward the camera, his composure cracking under media pressure. They were creating a disturbance, multiple complaints about suspicious activities. What complaints specifically? Jessica pressed. From whom? Kane looked to Captain Foster for support, but Foster was carefully maintaining distance from Kane's increasingly problematic statements. Dispatch received reports, Kane said vaguely. Jessica Chen pulled out her phone and speed-dialed the police dispatcher. On speaker, she asked, "This is Jessica Chen, Channel 7 News. Could you confirm what complaints were received today regarding voter registration activities at the Martin Luther King Community Center?" The dispatcher's voice crackled through clearly. "Ma'am, I show one call logged at 12:47 p.m. Caller identified as concerned citizen reporting suspicious gathering. No specific violations cited." Jessica looked directly into her camera. One anonymous call about a suspicious gathering prompted this level of police response to legally permitted voter registration. We'll be investigating this story further. Captain Foster realized the situation was beyond salvage. Media investigation would uncover documentation trails, interview witnesses, and potentially expose broader patterns of voter suppression that the department couldn't afford to have scrutinized. Officer Kane, you're relieved of duty pending internal review, Foster announced, knowing he needed to create distance between the department and Kane's actions. Kane's face went white, then red with fury. Captain, you're throwing me under the bus for doing my job. Your job doesn't include shutting down legal activities, Lieutenant Martinez stated firmly. Report to Internal Affairs Monday morning. As Kane stalked toward his patrol car, Detective Cruz approached Valerie with her notebook. Ma'am, I'm going to need a complete statement about today's events for our incident report. Valerie nodded professionally. Detective, I've been documenting everything systematically. Timeline, witnesses, specific statements made by each officer. I can provide you with comprehensive documentation. Cruz was impressed by Valerie's thorough preparation. You've done this before. I understand the importance of proper documentation, Valerie replied carefully. Pastor Washington approached Jessica Chen with his own evidence. Reporter, this isn't the first time. I've got records of similar incidents targeting our community organizing efforts. He pulled out a manila folder containing newspaper clippings, police reports, and photos from previous events. Back-to-school rallies shut down for noise violations, despite being under legal limits. Neighborhood cleanup stopped for blocking traffic on a virtually unused street, always the same pattern. Jessica Chen's investigative instincts fired up. Pastor Washington, could I get copies of these documents? This could be part of a much bigger story. As she examined the evidence, her phone buzzed with a text from her news director. Social media exploding with voter suppression videos. Need full investigation report for tonight's broadcast. The viral nature of the story was already spreading beyond local coverage. Multiple witnesses had live-streamed the confrontation, and hashtags like #VoterSuppression and #JusticeForVoters were trending on social media. Marcus Thompson approached with his phone. Ma'am, you should see this. The video of Officer Kane trying to grab you has already got 50,000 views. Valerie examined his screen, watching the footage of Kane's aggressive lunge and her defensive sidestep. The video clearly showed Kane initiating physical contact while she remained non-threatening. That's important evidence, she noted, making sure Marcus had his contact information for potential legal proceedings. Detective Cruz continued taking statements from witnesses. Mrs. Patterson, despite her age, provided a remarkably detailed account of events. I've been voting for 60 years, she declared. Never seen police try to stop people from registering before. College student Marcus Thompson had recorded most of the confrontation on his phone. Detective, I got everything from when Officer Kane first approached. Want me to send you the file? Cruz nodded gratefully. Text it to this number. We'll need all available evidence for the investigation. Councilwoman Sterling realized her political position was becoming untenable. The media coverage was portraying her as supporting voter suppression, which could destroy her electoral prospects. I want to clarify, she announced to Jessica Chen's camera, that I fully support all citizens' right to vote. If there were any procedural errors today, they should be investigated thoroughly. The political reversal was transparent but necessary for Sterling's survival. She was already calculating how to distance herself from the debacle while minimizing damage to her reputation. Captain Foster gathered his remaining officers for a quick huddle. I want everyone's body cam footage preserved and submitted to Internal Affairs immediately. No editing, no delays. Full documentation. Officer Chen approached him quietly. Captain, I need to report something. Kane's been getting direct calls from someone above our pay grade. He mentioned orders from downtown several times this week. Foster's blood ran cold. If Kane had been taking instructions from city officials to target voter registration activities, this could become a federal investigation involving conspiracy charges and civil rights violations. Put that in writing and submit it directly to Internal Affairs, Foster ordered. Don't discuss it with anyone else. Jessica Chen was conducting additional interviews with community members when her phone rang. Jessica, this is Sam Rivera from the Tribune, the voice said. I've been tracking similar incidents in 3 other districts. Are you seeing patterns of voter suppression targeting specific communities? Jessica looked around at the scene. The peaceful voter registration volunteers, the excessive police response, the documented permits that had been ignored, and the systematic nature Pastor Washington had described. Sam, I think we're looking at something much bigger than one incident, she replied. Want to collaborate on this investigation? Detective Cruz pulled Valerie aside for a more detailed interview. Ma'am, I need to understand your background. Your knowledge of legal procedures is extensive. Valerie chose her words carefully. I work in the justice system. I understand how investigations work, how evidence needs to be preserved, and how constitutional violations are documented. Cruz made notes. Justice system, how? Legal aid? Court administration? I'd prefer to provide those details in my formal statement, Valerie replied. Everything will be properly documented then. The detective nodded, recognizing someone who understood the importance of official channels and formal procedures. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Martinez was reviewing the body cam footage on her phone. Officer Chen's camera had captured Kane's initial approach, his failure to review permits, and his escalating aggression throughout the confrontation. This is going to be a problem, Martinez muttered to Sergeant Webb. Kane never followed proper procedures. He ordered dispersal without legal justification. Webb nodded grimly. Internal Affairs is going to have a field day with this. Clear policy violations, potential civil rights issues, and now media coverage. As the immediate crisis wound down, Valerie began organizing her documentation with the precision of someone accustomed to building legal cases. She had timestamps, witness statements, official permits, recordings of verbal exchanges, and photographic evidence of police behavior. Sister Valerie, Pastor Washington said quietly, that was some sophisticated legal knowledge you displayed today. Most community organizers don't cite federal statutes off the top of their heads. Valerie smiled diplomatically. 20 years of experience teaches you to understand the system. 20 years of experience in what exactly? Washington pressed gently. Before Valerie could answer, her phone buzzed with an urgent call. She glanced at the screen and her expression shifted subtly. This wasn't a community member or volunteer. Excuse me, Pastor, I need to take this, she said, stepping away from the group. Judge Blackwood, the voice said, using her formal title. This is D.A. Michelle Torres. I'm watching the news coverage of your situation. Are you safe? Valerie looked around at the dispersing crowd, the packing news crews, and the officers completing their reports. I'm fine, Michelle, but we need to discuss the implications of what happened here. Absolutely. I'm already requesting all police department documentation related to today's incident. If this is part of a pattern of voter suppression, it's going to require federal coordination. Valerie nodded, though Torres couldn't see her. The evidence suggests systematic targeting of voter registration activities in minority communities. I have documentation of multiple similar incidents. Can you be in my office Monday morning? We need to review everything before this gets referred to federal authorities. Of course, I'll have complete documentation prepared by then. As Valerie ended the call, she noticed Detective Cruz observing her from across the parking lot. The formal tone of the conversation, the use of official titles, and Valerie's obvious familiarity with high-level legal procedures had clearly raised questions about her true identity. Pastor Washington approached as volunteers continued packing up the registration materials. Everything okay with that call? Just coordinating next steps, Valerie replied vaguely. This incident is going to require follow-up through official channels. You keep talking like someone who knows those official channels pretty well, Washington observed. Valerie helped fold the last table, considering how much to reveal. The investigation was just beginning, and her role would become public soon enough. But for now, maintaining some privacy allowed her to continue gathering evidence without the complications that would come with full disclosure of her judicial position. Pastor, sometimes the system works better when people don't know exactly who they're dealing with, she said carefully, Today provided some valuable education about how certain officers operate when they think no one important is watching. Washington studied her face. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, they'll learn they were very wrong about that assumption. The voter registration drive was officially over, but the legal case was just beginning. Within hours, multiple investigations would be launched. Federal agencies would be notified, and a simple Saturday afternoon of civic engagement would become evidence in a much larger examination of voter suppression tactics. Valerie packed her documentation folder carefully, knowing that every piece of evidence collected today would be crucial in the proceedings to come. The afternoon had provided exactly the kind of systematic documentation needed to prove intentional civil rights violations. The real revelation was still ahead. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. District Attorney Michelle Torres's office buzzed with the controlled energy of prosecutors preparing for a significant case. Valerie sat across from Torres's desk, her documentation folder now expanded into 3 thick binders containing witness statements, video evidence, and legal analysis. Judge Blackwood, Torres began formally, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence you submitted. This goes far beyond one incident of police overreach. Valerie nodded, opening the first binder. Michelle, what happened Saturday was just the visible tip of a systematic voter suppression operation. I have documentation of similar incidents across 4 districts, all targeting minority community organizing efforts. Torres examined the organized evidence with prosecutorial precision. These police reports are nearly identical. Same language, same justifications, same outcomes. It's like they're following a script. Because they are, Valerie confirmed, pulling out a series of email printouts. I've obtained internal communications through FOIA requests that show coordination between police supervisors and city officials regarding enhanced enforcement during community political activities. The emails were damning. Torres read phrases like special attention to unauthorized gatherings and proactive intervention before situations escalate, with growing alarm. Judge, this could constitute conspiracy to deprive citizens of civil rights under federal law, Torres said quietly. We're talking about potential felony charges for multiple city officials. Valerie's phone buzzed with a call from Lieutenant Martinez. Excuse me, Michelle. This might be important. Judge Blackwood, Martinez's voice was tense. I need to inform you that Internal Affairs has uncovered some disturbing information during their investigation of Saturday's incident. What kind of information, Lieutenant? Officer Kane's phone records show multiple calls from Captain Foster's personal cell phone in the weeks leading up to your voter registration drive. The timing suggests advanced planning to disrupt your activities. Valerie put the call on speaker so Torres could hear. Are you saying this was premeditated? That's what the evidence suggests, ma'am. Kane also received calls from an unknown number registered to a shell company. We're working to trace the actual source. Torres leaned forward. Lieutenant Martinez, this is D.A. Torres. I'm going to need all of that evidence preserved immediately. We may be looking at federal charges. Yes, ma'am. Internal Affairs is coordinating with the FBI's Civil Rights Division. They'll be contacting you shortly. After ending the call, Torres and Valerie sat in heavy silence, processing the implications. What had seemed like individual police misconduct was revealing itself as organized conspiracy. Michelle, Valerie said carefully, there's something else you need to know. I wasn't at that voter drive by accident. Torres raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I've been investigating voting access issues in minority communities for months. Saturday was supposed to be reconnaissance, observing how voter registration drives are handled in different neighborhoods. Reconnaissance for what? Valerie pulled out another folder, this one marked with federal court seals. I've been assigned to oversee a potential federal case examining systematic voter suppression across multiple jurisdictions. Saturday's incident just became evidence in that investigation. Torres stared at the federal documentation. You're telling me this goes beyond our local jurisdiction? Way beyond. The Department of Justice has been tracking patterns of voter suppression in 12 states. Our city is now a primary case study. At that moment, Valerie's secure phone rang with a distinctive tone reserved for federal communications. Judge Blackwood, this is Assistant Attorney General Robert Chen. I understand you've experienced firsthand the voter suppression tactics we've been investigating. Robert, yes. I have comprehensive documentation of Saturday's incident, plus evidence of broader patterns targeting minority communities. We need everything you've collected. The Attorney General is personally reviewing this case. We're prepared to file federal civil rights charges if the evidence supports it. Torres watched the conversation with growing amazement. The woman she'd known as a community volunteer was clearly operating at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Robert, Valerie continued, DA Torres has been coordinating the local investigation. She has additional evidence that supports federal charges. Excellent. We'll need both of you in Washington for briefings this week. The timing is critical. There are similar cases pending in 3 other states. After ending the call, Torres looked at Valerie with new understanding. How long have you been undercover in our community? I'm not undercover, Valerie clarified. I live here. This is my community. But when the Justice Department needed someone to investigate voter suppression allegations, my background in federal civil rights law made me the logical choice. Your background? Valerie pulled out her federal judicial identification. I'm a federal district judge, Michelle. I've been assigned to investigate and potentially oversee prosecution of systematic voter suppression operations. Torres examined the credentials carefully. Judge Valerie Blackwood, Federal District Court, Civil Rights Division. 20 years on the federal bench. 19 years, 8 months, Valerie corrected with a slight smile. But who's counting? The revelation recontextualized everything Torres had witnessed. Valerie's calm under pressure, her precise legal knowledge, her systematic documentation, and her familiarity with federal procedures all made sense now. So when Officer Kane tried to arrest you, Torres began, he attempted to arrest a federal judge conducting an official investigation into civil rights violations, Valerie finished. That's going to be a very expensive mistake for him and every one who supported his actions. Torres's prosecutor instincts kicked in. What about the other officials involved? Councilwoman Sterling, Captain Foster. All under federal investigation now. Their actions on Saturday provided exactly the evidence we needed to prove systematic conspiracy to deprive citizens of voting rights. Valerie's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Jessica Chen. Judge, I've uncovered financial records showing payments from a voting machine company to city officials. Can we meet? The media investigation is uncovering the financial motivations, Valerie explained, showing Torres the message. Apparently, there's money behind this voter suppression effort. How much money? Enough to buy city officials, police supervisors, and coordinated suppression efforts across multiple states. We're talking about corporate-funded attacks on voting rights. Torres shook her head in disbelief. A federal judge conducting undercover civil rights investigation gets targeted by the very conspiracy she's investigating. The irony is incredible. The evidence is even better, Valerie replied. Everything they did Saturday was documented by multiple sources, while they were completely unaware they were incriminating themselves in federal crimes. A knock at Torres's office door interrupted their discussion. Her secretary entered with an urgent expression. "D.A. Torres, there are FBI agents here requesting to speak with both of you immediately." Torres and Valerie exchanged glances. The federal machinery was moving faster than either had expected. "Send them in," Torres instructed. Two agents in crisp suits entered, displaying their credentials. Agent Sarah Mitchell, FBI Civil Rights Division. Agent David Park, same division. "We're here to coordinate federal charges in the voter suppression investigation." Agent Mitchell addressed Valerie directly. "Judge Blackwood, we've reviewed your documentation from Saturday's incident. Combined with our ongoing investigation, we have sufficient evidence to file federal conspiracy charges." "Against how many defendants?" Valerie asked. 12 individuals so far, including police officers, city officials, and private contractors. The scope keeps expanding as we follow the money trail." The transformation was complete. A simple Saturday afternoon voter registration drive had become the catalyst for a federal investigation that would reshape how voting rights were protected in communities across the nation. The transformation was complete. A simple Saturday afternoon voter registration drive had become the catalyst for a federal investigation that would reshape how voting rights were protected in communities across the nation. Agent Mitchell opened her briefcase and spread documents across Torres's conference table. "Judge Blackwood, we need to walk through the evidence chain from Saturday's incident. Every detail will be crucial for the federal charges we're filing." Valerie pulled out her meticulously organized documentation. "Agent Mitchell, I have time-stamped records of every interaction, witness statements from 17 individuals, and video evidence from 12 different recording devices." Agent Park examined the materials with obvious approval. "This is incredibly thorough documentation, Judge. Most civil rights cases struggle with evidence gaps, but you've created an airtight record. 20 years of federal judicial experience teaches you to anticipate evidentiary requirements," Valerie replied. "I knew from the moment Officer Kane approached that this could become a test case." Torres watched the federal agents review evidence with the precision of surgeons. "What's the timeline for filing charges?" "We're coordinating with the Attorney General's office for simultaneous filings in 4 states, Agent Mitchell explained. "The voter suppression conspiracy operates across multiple jurisdictions, so federal coordination is essential." Valerie's secure phone rang again. "Judge Blackwood, this is Chief Judge Patricia Williams. I understand you've been investigating voter suppression while sitting on our court." "Chief Judge Williams, yes. The investigation uncovered systematic violations that require federal prosecution. The Attorney General briefed me this morning. You're being reassigned from investigation to presiding over the prosecution. Are you prepared to handle what could be the most significant voting rights case in decades?" Valerie looked at the evidence spread across the table, thinking of Mrs. Patterson's trembling hands as she tried to register to vote, of Marcus Thompson's courage in recording everything, of Pastor Washington's decades of fighting for his community's rights.
"I'm prepared, Chief Judge. This case needs to send a clear message that voter suppression will not be tolerated." "Excellent. Federal marshals will be serving warrants this afternoon. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for Friday." Agent Park pulled out his phone as it buzzed with updates. "Judge, the warrants are being executed now. Officer Kane, Captain Foster, and Councilwoman Sterling are all in custody."
Torres leaned forward. "What about the financial connections Jessica Chen discovered?" "That's where this gets interesting," Agent Mitchell replied, pulling out banking records. "The payments to city officials came from a shell company owned by Meridian Voting Systems, the same company that provides electronic voting machines to 12 states." Valerie studied the financial documents with growing concern. They were paying officials to suppress voter registration in communities likely to vote against candidates who supported their voting machine contracts. Exactly. Fewer registered voters in minority communities means less scrutiny of voting systems and continued contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Corporate interests had systematically attacked voting rights to protect their own financial arrangements with state and local governments. Torres's secretary buzzed the intercom. "D.A. Torres, Channel 7 News is requesting a statement about the federal arrests. They're saying this is connected to Saturday's voter registration incident. Tell them we'll have a joint press conference with federal authorities at 3 p.m., Torres replied. Agent Mitchell nodded approvingly. The public needs to understand the scope of what we've uncovered. This isn't just local police misconduct. It's organized corporate assault on voting rights. Valerie's phone buzzed with a text from Pastor Washington. Sister Valerie, the news is saying federal arrests are connected to our voter drive. Are you safe? She smiled at the message, realizing the community still knew her as a volunteer, not a federal judge. I need to inform my community about my actual role in this investigation. That might be premature, Agent Park cautioned. Once your judicial status becomes public, defense attorneys will claim prosecutorial misconduct. How so? They'll argue that a sitting federal judge conducting undercover investigation violated due process by not disclosing her authority during the initial incident. Valerie considered the legal implications. Actually, that argument strengthens our case. If they were willing to violate the rights of someone they believed was just a community volunteer, it proves their actions weren't based on any legitimate law enforcement concerns. Torres caught the strategic thinking immediately. They can't claim they were responding appropriately to a perceived threat when they didn't know they were dealing with a federal judge. Exactly, Valerie confirmed. Their behavior towards someone they thought was powerless demonstrates the systematic nature of their civil rights violations. Agent Mitchell's phone rang with an urgent tone. Agent Mitchell, this is the FBI field office. We have a problem with one of the arrests. What kind of problem? Officer Kane is claiming he was following direct orders from federal authorities to disrupt voter registration activities. He says he has documentation proving federal authorization. Valerie and Torres exchanged alarmed glances. That's impossible, Valerie stated. No federal agency authorized voter suppression activities. Kane's attorney is demanding immediate release based on federal immunity claims, the field agent continued. He's producing what appears to be official documentation from an unnamed federal task force. Agent Park pulled out his laptop and began typing rapidly. I'm checking all federal databases for any task forces or operations that could have authorized local voter suppression activities. There aren't any, Agent Mitchell said firmly. The federal government doesn't authorize voter suppression. Whatever documentation Kane has is either fabricated or part of the conspiracy. Valerie's judicial experience kicked in. We need to examine those documents immediately. If they're forgeries, that adds federal fraud charges. If they're real, we have a much bigger problem. Torres's intercom buzzed again. D.A. Torres, Officer Kane's attorney is here demanding his client's immediate release. He's claiming federal immunity and threatening to file emergency appeals. Send him to Conference Room B, Torres instructed. We'll meet with him immediately. Attorney Marcus Whitman entered with the aggressive confidence of someone holding strong cards. My client was following direct federal orders when he interrupted that voter registration drive. Here's his documentation. He handed over official-looking papers with federal seals and signatures. Valerie examined them carefully, her judicial experience helping her identify subtle irregularities in formatting and language. Mr. Whitman, she said slowly, these documents are sophisticated forgeries. The federal task force they reference doesn't exist, and the authorization procedures described aren't consistent with actual federal protocols. Whitman's confidence wavered slightly. That's a serious accusation. My client received these directly from his superior officers. Then his superior officers are part of the conspiracy, Agent Mitchell stated. Federal agencies don't authorize local police to suppress voter registration activities. The meeting was interrupted by Agent Park's laptop chiming with search results. I've got confirmation. The federal task force referenced in these documents was never established. Someone created fake federal authorization to justify local voter suppression activities. Valerie felt the pieces clicking into place. They created false federal cover for their conspiracy. That's going to add multiple fraud charges to the civil rights violations. The case was expanding beyond voter suppression into document fraud, impersonation of federal officials, and conspiracy at levels they hadn't initially imagined. The case was expanding beyond voter suppression into document fraud, impersonation of federal officials, and conspiracy at levels they hadn't initially imagined. 2 hours later, the federal courthouse steps buzzed with media activity as reporters prepared for the joint press conference. Valerie stood beside Agent Mitchell and D.A. Torres, adjusting the microphone while cameras focused on the trio representing local, state, and federal law enforcement coordination. Ladies and gentlemen, Agent Mitchell began, today we are announcing federal charges in a multi-state conspiracy to suppress voting rights in minority communities. This investigation began with an incident at a community voter registration drive that revealed systematic violations of constitutional rights. Jessica Chen raised her hand from the press corps. Agent Mitchell, can you confirm that Saturday's incident at the Martin Luther King Community Center was connected to this federal investigation? Yes. What appeared to be local police overreach was actually part of an organized effort to prevent citizens from exercising their fundamental right to vote. De Torres stepped forward. Our investigation has uncovered financial payments from Meridian voting systems to local officials in exchange for suppressing voter registration in communities likely to oppose their contract renewals. A reporter from the Washington Post pressed for details. D.A. Torres, how much money are we talking about? Over $2 million distributed across 4 states to police supervisors, city council members, and other officials responsible for permitting and enforcement decisions. Valerie approached the microphone, knowing this moment would transform her from anonymous community volunteer to public figure in a landmark civil rights case. I'm Federal District Judge Valerie Blackwood, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the courthouse steps. On Saturday, October 14th, I was conducting court-authorized investigation into voter suppression allegations when I was personally targeted by the conspiracy we're prosecuting today. The revelation sent a shockwave through the assembled media. Cameras clicked rapidly as reporters realized they were witnessing a federal judge describing her own experience as a victim of the crimes being prosecuted. Judge Blackwood, called out Sam Rivera from the Tribune. You were undercover during Saturday's incident? I was conducting official judicial investigation into voting rights violations. The defendants' actions toward someone they believed was just a community volunteer demonstrates the systematic nature of their civil rights violations. Marcus Whitman, Officer Kane's attorney, pushed through the crowd. Judge Blackwood, my client was following orders from what he believed were federal authorities. How can he be held responsible for obeying what appeared to be official directives? Valerie turned to face him directly. Mr. Whitman, your client attempted to arrest a federal judge conducting an official investigation. The forged documents he relied on add fraud charges to the civil rights violations. Forged documents. Whitman's voice cracked slightly. Agent Mitchell stepped in. The FBI has confirmed that the federal task force referenced in Officer Kane's documentation never existed. Someone created false federal authorization to justify local voter suppression activities. Jessica Chen sensed a major story breaking. Agent Mitchell, are you saying federal authorities were impersonated to authorize voter suppression? We're saying that sophisticated forgeries bearing federal seals were used to convince local officers they had federal authorization for activities that violate federal law. Pastor Washington appeared at the edge of the crowd, having heard about the press conference on local news. His eyes widened as he saw Valerie at the federal podium, finally understanding her true identity. "Pastor Washington," a local reporter called out, recognizing him, "you organized Saturday's voter registration drive. What's your reaction to learning that one of your volunteers was actually a federal judge?" Washington approached the microphones with the dignity of someone who'd spent decades fighting for his community's rights. "Sister Valerie, Judge Blackwood, has been worshiping with us for 3 years. We knew she was special, but we didn't know she was investigating the very forces that have been suppressing our votes for decades." "Do you feel deceived by her undercover investigation?" the reporter pressed. "I feel protected," Washington replied firmly. "She could have stayed in her courthouse and read reports. Instead, she came to our community and experienced firsthand what we face every time we try to participate in democracy." Valerie felt emotion tighten her throat at Washington's words. "Pastor Washington and his congregation trusted me to help with voter registration. I'm honored that my investigation can help protect their rights and the rights of citizens across the nation." Agent Park approached the microphone cluster. "We're also announcing the arrest of Meridian Voting Systems CEO Robert Crawford and Chief Operating Officer Sandra Phillips on federal conspiracy charges." The corporate arrests elevated the story to national significance. A major voting technology company had systematically attacked voting rights to protect their government contracts. Agent Park called out a CNN correspondent. "How widespread is this conspiracy?" "We have evidence of similar operations in 12 states. The total scope involves hundreds of thousands of citizens whose voting rights were systematically suppressed." Attorney Whitman made one final attempt to defend his client. "Judge Blackwood, if Officer Kane was victimized by this conspiracy as much as anyone, shouldn't that be considered in his prosecution?" Valerie's response carried the weight of judicial authority. "Mr. Whitman, your client chose to use physical force against citizens engaged in legal activities. Good faith reliance on authority doesn't excuse civil rights violations when the underlying orders are clearly unconstitutional." DA Torres added, "Officer Kane had multiple opportunities to verify permits and legal authorization. He chose aggression over investigation." As the press conference concluded, Valerie noticed familiar faces in the crowd. Mrs. Patterson stood with her granddaughter, tears in her eyes, as she realized the woman who'd helped her register to vote was the federal judge now protecting her rights. Marcus Thompson held his phone high, live streaming the revelation to thousands of viewers who'd followed the story since Saturday. "Judge Blackwood," Mrs. Patterson called out as reporters dispersed, "I just want to thank you for helping me with my registration form." Valerie stepped down from the podium to embrace the elderly woman. "Mrs. Patterson, you helped me more than you know. Your courage to register despite intimidation inspired this entire investigation." Marcus Thompson approached with his camera still recording. "Judge Blackwood, this is amazing. The woman who helped us register voters is the same person prosecuting the people who tried to stop us. Marcus, your video evidence from Saturday is crucial to our case. Every citizen who documented what happened contributed to this prosecution." Agent Mitchell rejoined the group. Judge Blackwood, we need to prepare for Friday's preliminary hearing. The defense will challenge everything: your investigation methods, the evidence collection, and the federal jurisdiction. Let them challenge, Valerie replied with quiet confidence. The evidence speaks for itself. They systematically violated voting rights, and we have comprehensive documentation of every violation. As the courthouse steps emptied, Valerie looked up at the federal building where she'd presided over cases for nearly 20 years. Friday's hearing would be different. She'd be presiding over a case where she was also the investigating officer and victim. The legal complexity was unprecedented, but the evidence was overwhelming. The conspiracy had made a fatal mistake by targeting a federal judge, providing the very documentation needed to prove their systematic violation of voting rights. Justice was finally within reach. Friday morning arrived with the gravity of historical significance. Federal Judge Valerie Blackwood entered her own courtroom for the preliminary hearing, but this time she sat at the bench presiding over the case that had emerged from her undercover investigation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The woman who'd been targeted for arrest was now determining the fate of those who'd tried to silence her. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Pastor Washington sat in the front row with Mrs. Patterson and Marcus Thompson, their presence a reminder of the community whose rights hung in the balance. Media representatives filled every available seat, while federal agents lined the walls with boxes of evidence. The United States of America versus Derek Kane, Alan Foster, Patricia Sterling, and others, Valerie announced formally. This preliminary hearing will determine whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed with federal civil rights charges. Defense attorney Marcus Whitman stood to address the court. Your Honor, we move for immediate dismissal based on prosecutorial misconduct. The investigating officer failed to identify herself as a federal judge during the initial incident, violating due process requirements. Valerie had anticipated this challenge. Mr. Whitman, undercover investigation is a standard law enforcement technique. The defendant's actions toward someone they believed was a powerless community volunteer actually strengthens the prosecution's case. How so, Your Honor? Because it proves your clients weren't responding to any legitimate threat or legal violation. They were systematically suppressing voting rights, regardless of who was organizing the activities. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen approached the podium with a thick folder of evidence. Your Honor, the government will demonstrate that the defendants conspired to deprive citizens of their constitutional right to vote through intimidation, false arrests, and coordination with private corporate interests. She projected the first piece of evidence onto the courtroom screens, the permits Valerie had tried to show Officer Kane. Exhibit A: valid city permits for voter registration activities properly filed and approved through official channels. The next slide showed body cam footage from Officer Kane's initial approach. Exhibit B: video evidence showing Defendant Kane ordering dispersal without reviewing legal authorization. Marcus Whitman objected. Your Honor, Officer Kane was responding to citizen complaints about suspicious activities. Mr. Whitman, Valerie replied, consulting her notes, dispatch records show only one anonymous call reporting a suspicious gathering. No specific violations were cited, and no follow-up investigation was conducted before ordering dispersal. Auzé Chen continued her presentation. Exhibit C: financial records showing payments from Meridian Voting Systems to Defendant Foster, totaling $47,000 over 6 months. The courtroom murmured as the financial conspiracy became clear. Councilwoman Sterling's attorney, Jennifer Walsh, stood to object. Your Honor, my client received consulting fees for legitimate municipal services. Ms. Walsh, Valerie noted, What municipal services did Councilwoman Sterling provide to a private voting machine company? Walsh consulted her notes frantically. Community liaison services and public safety consultation. Public safety consultation that involved suppressing voter registration activities in minority communities? Aosei Chen projected email exchanges between Sterling and Meridian executives. Exhibit D, internal communications discussing enhanced enforcement during community political activities in specific zip codes. The emails were damning. Phrases like reduce registration numbers and discourage participation appeared repeatedly, alongside demographic data targeting African American and Latino neighborhoods. Pastor Washington watched from the gallery as evidence mounted against those who'd terrorized his community for years. Each exhibit validated decades of suspicion that their civic activities were being systematically suppressed. Defense Attorney Whitman made another attempt. Your Honor, even accepting the government's evidence, Officer Kane believed he had federal authorization for his actions. Valerie leaned forward. Mr. Whitman, are you referring to the forged documents claiming to authorize voter suppression activities? The documents my client received appeared authentic.
Aosei Chen projected the fraudulent federal authorization. Exhibit E, forged federal task force documentation used to justify local voter suppression activities. FBI forensic analyst Dr. Patricia Moore took the witness stand. Your Honor, our analysis confirms these documents contain multiple indicators of forgery. The federal seals are incorrect, the authorization procedures described don't exist, and the task force referenced was never established. Dr. Moore, Valerie asked, in your professional opinion, would a reasonable law enforcement officer recognize these as potential forgeries? Yes, Your Honor. The inconsistencies in format and procedure would be apparent to anyone familiar with actual federal protocols. The testimony devastated the defense's good faith reliance argument. Officer Kane had either known the documents were fraudulent or had failed to perform basic verification procedures. As the morning session concluded, Valerie reviewed the evidence presented. The prosecution had systematically dismantled every defense argument while building an overwhelming case for federal civil rights violations. We'll reconvene after lunch for defense presentations, she announced. During the recess, Agent Mitchell approached Valerie in her chambers. Judge Blackwood, we've uncovered additional evidence that could complicate the case. What kind of evidence? Financial records showing payments to officials in 8 other states. This conspiracy is much larger than we initially realized. Valerie studied the new documents with growing concern. How much larger? We're talking about a coordinated national effort to suppress voting rights in communities that threaten certain political interests. The payments total over $15 million across multiple election cycles. The scope was staggering. What had started as local police overreach was revealing itself as a national conspiracy involving hundreds of officials and corporate interests. Agent Mitchell, this changes the entire framework of our prosecution. We're not just dealing with local corruption, we're looking at systematic assault on democracy itself. That's why the Attorney General wants to expand this into a joint task force investigation. The preliminary hearing could become the foundation for the largest voting rights prosecution in decades. When court reconvened, Defense Attorney Walsh presented Sterling's case. Your Honor, my client was responding to legitimate constituent concerns about community disruption. Ms. Walsh, Valerie responded. Which constituents specifically complained about legal voter registration activities? Walsh shuffled through her papers. We have statements from concerned citizens about unusual activities in their neighborhoods. Unusual activities like citizens registering to vote? Like large gatherings of unfamiliar individuals.
The coded language wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. Valerie's voice sharpened. Ms. Walsh, are you suggesting that citizens exercising their constitutional rights in their own communities constitute unfamiliar individuals? The question exposed the racial undertones of Sterling's justifications. Walsh backtracked quickly. My client was concerned about public safety implications of large gatherings. AUSA Chen stood for cross-examination. Ms. Walsh, how many people were present at the voter registration drive when your client arrived? Walsh consulted police reports. Approximately 23 individuals. And how many of those were volunteers helping with registration? 7 volunteers. So 16 citizens waiting to register to vote constituted a public safety threat requiring police intervention? The absurdity was apparent to everyone present. Walsh had no reasonable response. As closing arguments concluded, Valerie prepared to render her decision. The evidence was overwhelming, but the implications extended far beyond the individual defendants. Based on the evidence presented, she announced, the court finds probable cause to believe that defendants conspired to deprive citizens of their constitutional right to vote through systematic intimidation and false enforcement actions. The ruling sent the defendants to trial, but Valerie knew this was just the beginning. The investigation would now expand to examine similar operations across multiple states. As the courtroom emptied, Mrs. Patterson approached the bench. Judge Blackwood, I just want to thank you for everything you've done. Valerie stepped down to embrace the elderly woman. Mrs. Patterson, your courage to register despite intimidation inspired this entire investigation. Pastor Washington joined them. Sister Valerie, Judge Blackwood, you've given our community something we haven't had in years. Hope that the system can actually work for us. Marcus Thompson appeared with his ever-present camera. Judge, this story is exploding on social media. People are organizing voter registration drives in every state, using your case as inspiration. The movement was spreading organically. Citizens who'd seen the coverage were demanding accountability in their own communities and organizing registration drives despite potential intimidation. But as Valerie packed her files, Agent Mitchell approached with troubling news. Judge, we've intercepted communications suggesting retaliation against you personally. Someone's not happy about this prosecution. Valerie's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Federal judges aren't untouchable. Back off or face consequences. She showed the message to Agent Mitchell. How credible is this threat? Very credible. We're implementing security protocols immediately. As Valerie left the courthouse under federal protection, she reflected on the day's developments. Justice had been served, but the victory felt incomplete. The threats suggested powerful interests remained committed to voter suppression despite legal consequences. Her secure phone rang with a call from Chief Judge Williams. Valerie, congratulations on today's ruling. But I need to warn you, we're getting pressure from very high levels to limit the scope of this investigation. What kind of pressure? The kind that comes with threats to federal judicial funding and suggestions that certain judges might face administrative review of their decisions. The intimidation was escalating to unprecedented levels. Someone was willing to threaten federal judges to protect their voter suppression operations. That evening, as Valerie reviewed security footage from her home cameras, she noticed a pattern of vehicles conducting surveillance. The conspiracy had clearly decided she represented an existential threat to their operations. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted email containing financial records from a whistleblower inside Meridian Voting Systems. The documents revealed payments to officials in 12 additional states and coordination with other voting technology companies. The conspiracy was vast, well-funded, and desperate enough to threaten federal judges.
But they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd given her even more evidence to expand the investigation. As she prepared for what would undoubtedly be a long legal battle, Valerie thought of Mrs. Patterson's trembling hands filling out her voter registration form. That image would sustain her through whatever retaliation lay ahead. The real fight for democracy was just beginning.